Okay, I'm joined by Guilherme Borges, a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of São Paulo in Brazil. And Guilherme is also a member of the NCF project. So Guilherme, the reason I wanted to talk to you is that the last day of 2022 was not only the end of the year, it was also the end of the Bolsonaro government in Brazil. And so this is kind of what I wanted to talk with you about. So now that Jair Bolsonaro is no longer president of the country, we can now look more clearly at the relationships that sustained him in power. So particularly relationships with evangelical groups. Could you talk a little bit about these relationships?
Yeah, sure. In Brazil, just as in other countries, governments are composed of many alliances. In the case of the Bolsonaro government, among these alliances, the ones he maintained with evangelical groups were very strong. And these groups are mostly Pentecostal and neo-Pentecostal and are extremely opposed to legal change in the areas of sexuality, marriage, and family. And these groups bring with them a very strong discourse of spiritual warfare and the reestablishment of order, a discourse that found great affinities with Bolsonaro's public persona. And Bolsonaro was even elected on the promise of appointing someone terribly evangelical to Brazil's Supreme Court. And this expression, terribly evangelical, was actually used by him. And it's important to remember that the Supreme Court is the way through which agendas linked to sexuality and reproduction usually advance in Brazil. That was the case with same-sex marriage, and that was the case with the expansion of legal abortion rights in Brazil. In both cases, it happened through the Supreme Court. So evangelical groups saw the support for Bolsonaro as a good chance to enter the Supreme Court and legally regulate moral guidelines.
On January 8th of this year, we saw attacks on government buildings in Brazil's capital. And these protests were held against Bolsonaro's defeat. So how did these groups that supported Bolsonaro participate in these attacks?
What we have seen is that many churches and evangelical leaders across Brazil mobilized and even organized crowds to go to the country's capital to attack government buildings. There are, of course, church and evangelical leaders who stopped supporting Bolsonaro as soon as he lost the election. However, there are others who continue to support him and defend that the election result was falsified and that, therefore, Bolsonaro's defeat should not be accepted. What these people are asking for is a military coup, similar to what happened in Brazil in 1964. And it's not by chance. Another very important base of support for Bolsonaro is the army. Bolsonaro was a military man and has always been closely linked to the armed forces. During Bolsonaro's government, several members of the army held high-ranking positions in the government. We even had an army general in the Ministry of Health during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we could see in the attacks of government buildings was the coming together of these Bolsonaro support networks, because protesters were only able to enter government buildings because the armed forces allowed this invasion.
And just turning to the topic of non-religion, maybe could you talk a little bit about what the defeat of Bolsonaro's government means for non-religion in Brazil?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's important to say that Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who won the election against Bolsonaro, also had the support of many religious groups to get elected. The dispute between Lula and Bolsonaro was not a dispute between non-religion and religion. The point is that much of the religious support for the current government, post-Bolsonaro, is a support that includes environmental and racial agendas. The topic of diversity is also very present in the discourse of religious actors who support the current government, post-Bolsonaro. And among these religious actors, there are progressive Catholics and evangelicals, as well as leaders of Afro-Brazilian religions. And what perhaps has implication for non-religion is that these agendas are not monopolized by religious actors. Many of the agendas for which Bolsonaro was elected, agendas against sexual and reproductive rights, have religious actors at the forefront, while many of the agendas for which Lula was elected are not agendas in which religious groups have a leading role. I think this is a very important difference between the Bolsonaro government and the current government when it comes to non-religion.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Guilherme. It's really, really great to get your perspective on this.
Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, the Bolsonaro government is over, but the ideology behind that government remains quite strong in Brazil. So it's great that the NCF project is looking into this matter.